Well, hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. I'm your old pal, Dan Shaheen. Today, we're going to talk to Chris Staros, publisher, editor-in-chief, I think, of Top Shelf Comics. Just happens to be the publisher of my all-time favorite graphic novel, Eddie Campbell and Alan Moore's From Hell. We talked to Eddie Campbell at length about the From Hell Master Edition, about everything From Hell, and that led me to Chris. So we'll talk to him today. He's got a really cool history in comics, kind of a latecomer to comics in his life, but man, what an impact he's had. First, a little bit of show business. Look, guys, I look at my analytics. I know most of you who are watching this are not subscribed. If you would do me a big favor, and I mean a humongous favor, this is about the biggest thing you can do for me, click that subscribe button. If you really want to be a pal, click that bell for notifications, and you'll get notifications about all my new interviews with all kinds of people. Well, like who, you might say? Well, coming up in early January, we're going to take a little holiday break. Coming up in early January, who's our next guest? Oh my gosh, the incredible Jim Rugg. He returns to the show for the, third time? Yeah, third time back on the show. This time we're going to talk about what else? The Incredible Hulk, Grand Design, the new project. Oh, that's my wife who only calls me when I'm broadcasting, so I'm going to hang up on her right now because I'm talking comics. So, come back for Jim Rugg. Oh, and tomorrow, I dabble. I don't just read comics. Sometimes I watch a little bit of TV. I watch a little Star Trek. So join me tomorrow with Lieutenant Commander Larry Young and John Price, PhD, for Serious Star Trek. We're going to look at Space Seed from the original series, The Wrath of Mr. Rourke. We'll talk about Ricardo Montalban and why he's so macho, yet so flawed, so delicate. That'll be tomorrow at noon. Watch it live. Comment if you're a Star Trek fan. Come check it out. If you're not, hey, you might enjoy it anyway. Sometimes we talk comics as well. So, without any further ado, I want to go talk to my guest. But maybe a little bit of further ado, because where we got to go, we can't do it here. Okay, we're in the Batcave, so let's bring in our guest today, Mr. Chris Staros. Hey, welcome to Comic Book News.
Hey, man. How's it going? Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy fella.
Oh, no problem, man. I don't think I've ever been in the Batcave before, so this is pretty special for sure.
I've never been in the Red Room before, so that's perfect. And if you're going to go in a Batcave, right, which Batcave are you going to want to be in? To me, it's this one.
I'm a 60s Batman guy for sure. Adam West all the way, definitely.
I just put my phone in airplane mode for my wife. I sure hope she's okay. She knows about this. Anyway, Chris, thanks for coming in. I've been a big fan of your output for a long time. I met you once at the Alternative Press Expo. You probably don't remember that.
I do love it, man. That was a good show. Gosh, we used to travel so much back in the day. I think we were doing like 20, 22 shows a year. Did that for, 10, 15 years. And that was a great time. And some of my first memories were at 8, back in the early days, when I was just doing a zine and representing Eddie Campbell and Gary Spitzer Millage of Strangehaven and trying to get all of our products kind of out onto the scene a little bit. And 8 was one of the first things. I remember I ended up with a abscess at 8 and still powered through the whole weekend while I was,
man. Well, I just remember you would bring these stacks of limited edition hardcovers, right, that you could only get at shows. So first I saw them and I'm like, oh, Staros, I want those in my store. And then you're like, oh, here, I'll just sell you some. You can buy as many as you want. And so you flipped me immediately, and you had an in because it's my all-time favorite graphic novel. I mean, since then you've gone to publish many things, but I know that's got to be one of, if not your very top seller.
Well, From Hell is I agree with you. It's one of the greatest graphic novels ever done, and I've had a really long and great relationship with both Eddie and Alan on this project and others, and it's been one of the highlights of my life. I remember, when I had been representing Eddie back in the day, in the late '90s, and representing his stuff because he was self-publishing out of Australia, but he had no place to really store his books or had people help fulfill diamond orders or do conventions and U.S. conventions for him. And so I kind of came in and started helping him with that. And he did a couple big interviews with me and some of my fanzines and stuff. And there was a time there where he was collecting From Hell and wanted to distribute it. And I made a strong pitch for said, let's just do it with us, with Top Shelf, and the three of us, and let's manage this thing as tight as we can and just go for it. And they set up a meeting with me to go over to meet Alan at that time. And that day was one of the, greatest fanboy moments of my life, right? I'm getting to meet Alan Moore, spend the day with him. And we ended up, there he is, there's the magazine photo. And then we ended up spending about 8 or 9 hours together that day. And not only did we reach an agreement to handle From Hell for Alan and Eddie, but we also reached an agreement to pull out of mothballs Lost Girls and finish the development of Lost Girls and put that book out. And Lost Girls was one of the greatest experiences of my life too. It's probably my proudest moment in publishing because it's a type of book that was so controversial and had so many legal ramifications to it that you needed a smaller publisher who could risk everything to put something out, but also a publisher who had been around just long enough to be able to handle it because it was a big project, it was an expensive project. And so it was one of those times where we did something other publishers probably couldn't have done, bigger publishers couldn't have taken on, and that was all great. And then there's so many great anecdotes From Hell and Lost Girls, like from rescuing all the From Hell negatives out of a dumpster once, and the book had no backup, so it almost actually went to the landfill. And we managed to save the book so that it could be reprinted. And then we took those negatives and digitized them after that because we realized there was only one copy of this book in a warehouse, and so now it's digitized and there's backups of it and everything,
That's an amazing story. So he went from the serious Alan Moore to maybe the happier Alan Moore, the rarely seen happy Alan Moore that we want to see.
Alan is a very jovial, nice man. His photos, obviously, he has an ominous presence in photos, but you sit down with him, he's a sweetheart, the first thing he's going to say to you when you answer this door is, "Hello, Chris, would you like some tea?" He's just super friendly anyway. Great man.
Well, I can't wait for my Alan Moore interview. Just watch this space for more info on that.
And of course, Eddie and I have been close friends for years, and we published a lot of his Alec stuff, his Bacchus stuff as well, mostly collections of that because he obviously had a long career of self-publishing and working with various publishers on that stuff throughout the years. But the sort of phone book epic collections that are still available, the Alec and the two-volume Bacchus one, are, we collected, and I'm proud of those too because
I've got them all. They're wonderful. Yeah, we looked at them with Eddie in depth too. I highly recommend those. Honestly, if you're gonna say like Eddie Campbell, like if you just want to say like what's the Eddie Campbell work to recommend, my first reach is to Bacchus, probably even before From Hell, because it's so personal yet such a universal kind of stories that he's able to tell in those.
And the whole idea of Bacchus still being live and a bit of a jaded scallywag, and that he still has all these petty grudges and beefs with some of the old gods who are still hanging around, and they still get into it from time to time. And then how he relates and interacts with humanity. I don't know. It's so witty and it's so smart. Eddie was always a brilliant writer too, and obviously From Hell is what he's most known for. But if people take a chance on his writing as well, his own personal projects are fantastic.
Yeah, pick it. Oh, I just read. What did I just read? The new one. Oh my gosh, the one about money. The dirty.
Yeah, right.
From
That's a really great
from
one.
First Second.
Mhm.
It was wonderful, really great. I'll bring it on the show sometime too and take a look at it. Like Eddie's at top of his game right now, and even improving, reaching into color and digital art, and taking all that style that used to just be hand pasted up collage and stuff, and just making the most of the digital tools. Love it. So tell me, after from hell, that book alone is a humongous worldwide hit. Tell me, what's like the number two, if let's besides any, let's say, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Century, or Tempest, or any of those,
Right.
and besides Alan Moore related stuff, like what is the number one top selling top shelf book?
Well, the biggest selling books have been recently Congressman John Lewis's March trilogy.
Oh
About
yeah.
the history of his life, which John Lewis felt was very important and supported it quite extensively. I mean, he did over 200 personal appearances and speaking engagements with that book. And we're not talking small engagements like university commencement addresses, appearances on CNN, the Rachel Maddow show, Comic Con appearances and such. I mean, he did a lot to that book because he really wanted to take that civil rights story to a new generation, to a younger audience who could read and learn about it as well. Because when he was a kid, he had read that Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story comic, and it had an influence on him as how accessible it was and how influential it was on him. So it turned out to be something that he enjoyed. And so March has been a huge seller for us. Recently, we did a book with George Takei about his, they called us enemy, about his time in the Japanese internment camps. And that was, has been a huge success too. So, I mean, Top Shelf, we've been lucky over the years. We've had a few perennials, the things that go along. The Jeff Lemire books like The Underwater Welder and Essex County have been big perennials for us too. I don't know. There's others. I can't think of them right now, but it's nice. And we've had a few titles that just keep on going.
James Cochalka, some of my favorite stuff. I really love his work. You know, and but let's take it back a little bit further. Even
Yeah.
tell me about the Staros report.
Oh God, yeah. Okay. Well, that one that you have right there on the left is the rare number two. Nobody has the number one
Yes,
because there were only 40 copies of it and it was stapled and it's pretty terrible. But I
I
always
can't. I couldn't find even a picture of the number one, so
it's
I
good.
found
Thank God. And so
I
the
found
funny
a
thing
few.
is, like when I talk to students at schools or when I do it on my, sometimes I've taught classes at Savannah College of Art and Design in the past, or when I do like my little side consulting things when I'm mentoring, aspiring cartoonists and such. One of the rules of thumb I tell them is, have the humility, have the confidence to put something out there and the humility to know the next thing you do is going to be a lot better. And so the Stars report was my attempt to get into a game that I really wasn't sure how I was going to fit into. I write decently, but I'm not really a creative writer, and I can't draw. I still draw the same birds and houses I drew when I was 4 years old. Mom's in the front yard, dad's in the front yard, and there's blades of grass. I could still kill at that drawing, but that's it. And so my biggest frustration coming into comics as an adult who didn't read comics as a kid, I came into it from the literary side. Like I was discovering what Fantagraphics was doing, a lot of the literary stuff. And when I went into comic book shops to find some of these things, they weren't there. And they generally had to be mail ordered. So I started mail ordering like crazy. And since I have a crap memory, I would take notes on all the books I was reading just to remember them. Like, oh, this is what I liked, and this was it. And ended up writing sort of encapsulated reviews about these books. And then at some point, I realized maybe the information on these really interesting books I'm reading and where to order them from, what PO box, how much to put in the envelope. This is pre-internet, right? And would be of useful to somebody, and thus those little zines were born, the Staros reports. And I remember I met one of the early organizers of the Small Press Expo, Chris Orr. I don't know if you ever met Chris or not, but a great guy and a
Mm-mm.
real influential part of getting the SPX in the early days really popular. But he had sent me a letter about one of the Staros reports once, and he said, "Man, you should come to the Small Press Expo." And I go, "What's that?" I didn't even know that there were fan conventions back then. Literally, that's how ignorant I was to that whole scene. And he says, "You
And
should."
where were you living? Where were you living at the
I
time?
was in Atlanta,
Yeah.
Georgia.
Okay.
But and he was like, "Well, why don't you come and bring your some copies of your zine and sell them?" I go, "Nobody's going to buy this zine. It's ridiculous." He goes, "Oh, you should see the crap people bring these things. No worries, people will buy it." And I went there, brought it, and sold 100 copies, and thus was the like the start of the whole convention thing. Now, and for years, I was always a musician, a hard rock and heavy metal lead guitar player. I know it's kind of hard to visualize these days, but and played in original bands, so I understood touring, I understood hitting the road, and so the convention thing clicked in pretty quickly. Like I need to hit the road with these things. And then also started to think out of the box marketing wise. Like for example, I would take copies of the Staros report. I overprinted them because I knew people weren't going to be buying them, but I wanted copies to be able to just sort of give away. And I remember going to like Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean signings, apologies to both of them, and handing out copies of my zine to everybody in line because they were going to be stuck there for 3 or 4 hours, you know what I mean, waiting their turn. So I thought, well, here's something to read while you're doing it. And then I did research about like who were the best comics retailers in the nation, and I put like bundles of 25 copies each and just mailed them to all the stores, to say, hey, put them on your shelf, sell them, and keep the money. It's a gift. And
Okay.
anyway,
I'm an ex retailer, so I got to stop you there. I want to ask you, who were the top retailers? Who were the ones you had? I'll
yeah,
bet I could guess a couple of them.
yeah, I can't remember all of the great stores, but there's those top 50 stores that everybody knows.
Comic Relief, Rory Root at Comic
Yeah,
Relief, I would think, would be
Silver
among them.
was definitely one of them. I would have to go back and look, but the stores that had
Quimby's,
reputation, yeah, no.
Austin Books and Comics, maybe guys like that. That would not just that were big, because there's plenty of volume
Yeah,
players, but the people who would take a chance on stuff way outside of the mainstream and had a built-in audience ready and hungry for that
there's
stuff.
stores like Millionaire Picnic in Massachusetts that had
There you
reputation of
go.
putting a lot of zines and hand tooled crafted stuff on their shelves.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
you were
yeah.
getting a lot of mail from all that. Back then it was just letters to a PO box. Again pre-internet. But it helped me think about how to market things. It helped me think about how to make things better. And then I moved to soliciting through Diamond Previews and understanding how all that worked. And I was still sort of agenting for Eddie and Gary Spencer Millage with Strange Haven out of the UK. And then I met Brett Warnock, who was my business partner for years in Top Shelf at the Small Press Expo. And we sort of realized we had a lot in common. And we felt like we'd be a perfect fit because he was real design intensive. He was the head cat of the bunch and he made us look good. And then I was sort of the brute force workhorse that would just pound out the conventions and pound out the hours that it needed to get all this stuff done and handle more of the business side of things. And that's how Top Shelf was born in the like 97 timeframe.
Wow. Going from not reading comics at all as until 1990 to founding such an impactful and important publisher publishing house that's a pretty fast and amazing journey. But I guess it's kind of speaks also to the scale of the comics industry at the time, and even now it's really not that big of an industry, is it?
I mean, I think that I did sort of do my own quasi master's program in comics, researching, trying to find everything I could. But it's true, it's not all that hard to get your arms around comics. You can really
Yeah.
dive in. And I read everything from the classics, the mainstream stuff, the indie stuff. I understood the sort of historical progression of comics after a while. And I was always a literary guy. I loved the French literary writers of the turn of the century, I don't know, I was a big horror fan, so I read a lot of horror too, and sort of the gothic horror novels of
Yeah,
yesteryear.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
So
that brings us to this moment in time too, though, where all the big publishing houses are publishing comics, and it's the kind of comics that used to be your domain. Like you and Gary Groth used to be the guys, and now they're all going to these bigger publishing houses, getting maybe more exposure. I don't know. I wonder if about, like, as the success. I know these guys get big contracts. For instance, Joe Sacco put out a book from, I think, Abrams this year. That was amazing. His new book, but I don't hear anybody talking about it. I didn't see it get wide play in comic shops at all or anywhere.
I think it's great that comics have sort of come into their own. And, around the year 2000, every article was Biff Pang Pow, comics aren't just for kids anymore. And you always had to start, every interview like this would start with a 5-minute definition of what a graphic novel was, right? Because nobody knew what that meant and everything. And it was the same old thing over and over and over again. At least now, graphic novel is a common word. People know that lots of movies are based on it. Lots of people are reading them. It's not quite France where, 1 out of every 5 books sold is a graphic novel yet, but it is growing and growing within the American audience. And it's got quite legitimate. And the fact that the big guns, the big publishers have jumped into the game is fantastic. It's obviously meant a lot more, lucrative contracts for cartoonists and more money up front, more advances, because typically the smaller indie houses like Top Shelf and others weren't really liquid enough or had enough capital to go up heavy up front on advances. We were more of a back end house where we pay for printing and marketing, and as books sold, pay out royalties and so forth. But now, Top Shelf we're part of IDW for the last 7 years. IDW is a much bigger house. We are much more competitive in that space now, where we can do reasonable to large advances on projects that we want to bring in. And also there's, like with every house, there's people that grew up loving Fantagraphics and that's their dream, that's their destination. There's people that grew up liking Top Shelf, that's their destination, Drawn Quarterly. Other people like those publishers and use them for a while and then use them sort of as stepping stones to move on to Scholastic or Simon & Schuster or other
so let's talk about that, because that's, to me, the story should be bang pow, comics are for kids again. Like that's the story nobody talks about how we had a decade of, you would go to a comic store with a kid and it's like, what can I get for Junior who likes the Super Friends or whatever? And there was not a lot. And if you had a young daughter, like I have 2 young daughters, even tougher. Now it seems like the tables have totally turned, and that the biggest selling stuff from the big publishers is coming out of Scholastic and is aimed at exactly that audience.
Yeah, no, and it's great. Raina Tellermeyer's stuff, and then Andy Runton, who used to be with us, was now Scholastic, is doing fantastic over there. Kudos to all of them. It's great. It took me a while early on to get used to the fact that people redeveloping were moving on to other publishers, right? I took that hard at first, but now I realize this is part of the thing. And also, I should have understood it from the get-go, because as a crazy Elvis fan, there was Sun Records and there was RCA. Not that we're anywhere near the impact of Sun, but you get the metaphor, right? Elvis was with Sun and then went on to a bigger house and did really well there. But the smaller publishing houses can still do really great with things. Look at the success of From Hell, look at the success of March. It wasn't, because we were small, that didn't mean we lacked getting penetration or distribution or handling PR or marketing in a savvy way to get to a large possible audience. And, but I like that there's lots of players and lots of destinations. There's so much good work out there right now, and so many great cartoonists that we couldn't absorb them all. We need all the publishers in the industry, and maybe even some newcomers too, to be able to handle all that, So.
Yeah, I wanted to take a look at your excellent website, by the way. I especially like the catalog section where you break it down by categories, theme, and artist. Just makes it.
Right now, the 2021 releases, that's the best scroll of the website, because it shows the first few there show kind of like some highlights from 2020 and some key books that came out. But then it goes month by month through the year. Cody was an amazing book. The Home Time was amazing. Grout was amazing. So many of these books are really incredible. Jared Cullum is one of the great painters right now. And wow, it's a lovely little story about a
That
girl.
is a beautiful looking cover, right down to the logo. And
If you hit that right arrow, you could see a few interior pages there
oh,
too.
great, yeah,
Um,
man. Thank you for having such a live stream friendly website, by the way, too, because this looks fantastic on screen. Great. Oh man, this is just the kind of book I would get for my kids. I've got a kindergartner
right.
and a 2 year old.
And what you were saying about, comics for kids, there was a time, like when we started, we were like, we need comics to grow up. And we spent a lot of time worrying about mature reader books that were packaged like books so that they would appeal
Yeah,
to mature people and grow up this industry that we felt was a little bit too focused on the superhero aspect of things. We wanted to bring fine art and literature and the literary comics into the world. And we weren't the only people. There were a lot of us doing that at the same time. And then at some point we realized, hey, we forgot the kids, and that's why Bone was so good, and other projects early on. And at first I was mildly against those because I really wanted comics to grow up. But then you realize it has to be the full spectrum. If you don't have stuff for young people to read and come in, they're never going
bingo.
to read the older stuff. So you need that
Yeah,
continuous stream of young reader stuff to middle grade to YA to mature reader things. And I think Top Shelf has a nice balance. Corgi's another one of our all age titles. That's great. And the fifth book wrapping up the series just came out, and Christian's just an amazing.
I bought Corgi Volume One in my store. I carried it along
Yeah,
with everything Top Shelf at the time, and I sold the heck out of this book. And Owly was a monster hit, like you can't imagine the top
very
shelf
much so.
editions.
Yeah, I really enjoyed working on Owly on all those years together with Andy. And now this is classic. I wish him the best there. I know he's going to do really well there now, of course. And then the Delicacy there, that's a book that came out earlier this year. Uh, an incredible book. James Alvin, this is our third book with him, but I
Mm.
think this is the real breakout one. And it's all about two gentlemen, sort of more from the country, who end up inheriting a little property and a little money and get caught up in the big restaurant business, and they get
Mm.
caught up in big city life a little too much. And they discover a strain of mushrooms that are particularly tasty and makes them famous, but it causes some real problems. Anyway, and that's an excellent graphic novel too.
Wow, that sounds great. I definitely look forward to checking that one out. Man, you got a full slate of stuff coming out.
And then there's down there Rivers by Dan Barry and David Gaffney. Take a look at that one too. Some of the interior art on Rivers. That's another incredible book.
This one gets me right away just from the title. I haven't heard of
Yes,
this
well, the
one.
Jekyll Island Chronicles is fantastic. That's book three, which wraps up the trilogy there. It's more of a World War One reimagining epic, and that one's actually done quite well for us too over the years.
Interesting.
Mm.
Okay, let's take a look here. Rivers.
Um,
Oh man, I like this style.
Dan Barry's art is phenomenal, and this book is really interesting because it has three or four different styles in it of storylines that are converging on each other in some real impactful way. And it all revolves around a sort of an incident that happened years past that other people are having to deal with, and a very clever book, written by David Gaffney and Dan, and they did so great. And Better Place, I don't know if you've seen a lot of the reviews on Better Place right now, but they're
Uh-uh.
doing it. Pirate Penguin, fantastic as well. Funny as hell.
Let's take a look at that. Great. I just love it. I mean, we have got I don't know how to put it in business speak from my day job. It's like we got the customer pipeline poised, right, for life. You can
Yeah,
get them from pre-literate to to just learning to read. The young adult and teen market is exploding, and it just makes me think the market for adult comics, which is already primed and has its canon and classics, is now ready for that next wave of all those kids who are growing up with the literacy of comics.
right.
That was disappeared for almost a generation, I
Yeah,
think.
I know. This book's really cute because it's about a kid and his grandfather. His grandfather really always supported his superhero fantasies, and but the father dies, and everybody tells him that the grandfather went to a better place, and so
Oh
now the
no.
kid wants to try to find that better place, you know. So anyway, it's an interesting journey. It's very very
Yeah. I
Ballad
think
for
we're in a
Sophie, another epic book. Again, beautiful art. Um, this one is another I think must read this year. It's a big book, and I don't know. We're really excited about this one. I, I don't want to give away too much about it because the thing, but it's about the life of a composer and his his interesting past and the relationship he has with certain people. And a great, it's a great one too.
there's almost too many good comics and graphic novels coming
Yeah,
out, I think,
there
since
are. You're
Chris.
right about that. There's so many talented cartoonists doing great work. Um, and,
That can kind of get lost in the shuffle. Like how do you make an impact in the market?
it's not easy. And then if you go back, just go back a little bit.
Yeah.
The latest
Oh, this one.
Surfside Girls came out, the
Yeah.
science of surfing, and it's hitting stores this week. Right at the same time that Apple Plus has announced that they are doing a 10 episode live action Surfside Girls series. So that's going to TV here soon. And I'm really happy for Kim. She's such a great talent, such a sweetheart of a person. And these Surfside Girls stories are so endearing and so sweet. So they do work, you know, for the younger reader as well as everybody really. And
Yeah.
this particular book is the first two are more adventures with the Surfside Girls, and this one is more of an educational book about surfing with some fun adventure stuff in it.
This is looks great.
Mhm.
I love this style. It's so like it's a breath of fresh air.
Mhm.
Looking at it, it's really great with the lack of the exterior panel edges, you know,
Well,
and I
well,
think it looks
oftentimes, you know,
fantastic.
people, Kim came to comics not from comics, as did Christian Slade of Corgi. He was not from
Yeah,
inside comics, and they have they both brought very different styles, which I found refreshing
yeah.
to the medium, you know.
I I
So,
think it looks great, and all of this multimedia appeal just brings everybody back to comics.
yeah,
Here, let's talk about James Cochalko for a second because here's a
absolutely.
guy who, really wrote stuff that wasn't for kids, for sure, and
Well,
but and but had an aesthetic
yeah,
that might appeal to kids, and he was able to
yeah.
translate that into mainstream success in a lot of places.
Well, think about also, you know, all of us get older, right? And we grow up, so we change. And you know, when we first started publishing Jeffrey Brown with Clumsy and Unlikely and James Kachaka with his early books, they were much more. They were single guys out there doing their thing, and they were doing much more sort of indie punk rocky kinds of things. But of course, they ended up both having children later in life, and fatherhood and children were a very important part of them. And they started reimagining some stories that they would want their kids to read, and they started producing these really excellent books for younger readers. And James
Yeah.
has made, you know, the better part of his latter part of his career on these younger reader books with Johnny Boo and there's the Gork Patrol and Dragon Puncher, which are three that we publish. But he's so prolific, you know, we can't keep up with everything he does. So he has other publishers as well. But we've been publishing James for I guess now around maybe 25 years or so. And so he's been a part of the family forever. So we love James.
It's great. And for a guy who, eschews the term craft in comics, there's no doubt you can see he has progressed. Drawing all those hundreds and thousands of pages he's drawn has gotten better and better. This stuff looks
Well, what
markedly better than his earlier
you
stuff.
know, if you look at the difference between sort of the American aesthetic and often the European aesthetic, and I'm overgeneralizing here, so I don't mean to insult anybody at all, but
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
you know, you need to know how to draw. Like every comic there is beautiful. The draftsmanship is beautiful. In
Yes.
America, a lot of cartoonists come in with sort of that punk rock aesthetic, you know. So I'm going to pick up this guitar and jam it out, and screw it if I can't draw, you know. And they come up inevitably with a very unique style, which gets honed and honed until it's perfect. And James is a perfect example of that, you know, which was story before craft, and he grew into a very unique and very polished cartoonist, you know. And so I love the way he evolved.
Yeah, I loved his stuff. I was a big fan of Monkey versus Robot and his other work. I just loved his can-do attitude on top of just like very clear storytelling chops. It works perfectly for kids because it has to be that clear for kids.
Sure.
But then when you take it to adult subject matter, it just lets you like work in the realm of like pure ideas, which is kind of what I think Monkey versus Robot was.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that stuff, and I love everything. But wait, we've got some comments coming here in from the people out there. You know what they want to know about, Chris? You got a mentoring program. You want to talk about your mentoring program a little bit?
Sure. It's funny, like, with the last 2 years with COVID, we haven't been able to do any conventions or travel or meet anybody. And I haven't, I used to travel and speak at universities for now and then and all that had sort of been shut down because of COVID. And I thought, got a little free time on my hands, maybe I'll start a little side thing where I'll, for really affordable prices, sit down with people and let people have a second set of eyes on their projects, to talk not only about the editorial quality of their work, writing and the storytelling and also the art, but also, a lot about how to submit to publishers, what makes good storytelling, how to market yourself through social media and crowdfunding and conventions and such, and also to talk about how money is made in comics, how things work, about publishing contracts and agents, Hollywood exploitation, careers, and basically just be a quiet, private second set of eyes, as you would be, if you had an editor working on your project. And surprisingly, it has become pretty popular. Like, I started it in May of 2015, and it was just 2 nights ago I finished my 160th session.
Wow.
And some of the people are repeat customers, meaning I'm helping them with the first draft and giving them some advice on, and they come back with the second, and then we're going over a third and trying to help people sort of get to that next level. Now, an editor can't necessarily take somebody and turn them into somebody else, but we can help percentage-wise improve your work, by certain things. And there's just a lot of questions about the industry a lot of people have that they maybe don't know a lot about. And, I'm happy to help answer any questions anybody has. So.
I think especially in this time where we're seeing an explosion of interest in comics, and you're seeing a lot of people come in going like, oh, graphic novels are hot. I can draw, so I could probably just do comics. Mm-hmm. And with mixed results, I think. Sometimes it's refreshing and you see a breath of fresh air. We've talked to a few people like that. But sometimes you see people who just seem like they're not grounded in the literacy of comics. What do you think about that? Like, how much, you would suspect somebody who went to write a novel has read lots of novels, let's say, and somebody who makes a movie has read lots of movies. But sometimes it seems like that's not the case in comics. Do you think, how important is it to ground yourself in the canon of comics, and what would you consider to be those works that you
like my friend Robert Venditti, who was surrogates for us in Homeland Directive, and went
friend of the show, we interviewed him right here,
right, and went on to do great things at DC Comics and other publishers as well. He always says everybody tunnels their way through the mountain via a different path, and it's so true. Like, it's hard to know. I don't think there is one way to do that. Some people's philosophy is the things you should read should be not comics, so that you're not, just trying to be an image clone or whatever, I mean, and but it really doesn't matter what your background is. Bring what you bring to the table and go from there and work from it. And if you need an honest opinion on what you're doing and some constructive criticism, what to do better, that's one of those things that I'm trying to provide now on a one-on-one private basis with people, which is what an editor would do with, an actual person they're working with, at the publishing house.
It's funny that you say that, because I think that was a major problem with cartoonists for so long, is they only looked at comics, and specifically only American superhero comics.
Right.
And But now it's come all the way around. So it's like now in 2022, right? Almost. You need to. There's plenty of stuff just in the last couple of decades to have read that you really need to absorb. Not to mention the history. Going back to the.
Well, there's two things. Like one, I learned a couple lessons when I was younger. One is that you get your biggest compliments from the drunkest people, right? So like, and friends also value your friendship too much to talk really honestly about your work, and also their areas of expertise might not necessarily be in comics. So you take the greatest comic book ever done and the worst comic book ever done and set them side by side, and they wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So the sometimes you need to have somebody actually give you some face value analysis of what you're doing, and that's what I'm trying to do, which some people are enjoying and others are not. One of the other things I learned too way back when, this is from my metal days, because we were a good metal band, all original, kind of Scorpions like, right? Two lead guitar players, melodic singer, and so forth. And but based on our age and when we got started, we were ready too late, if you know what I mean, right? Like we were ready at 88, early around 88 or so. We were in our prime. We were playing from like 85 to 88. But to be on the front of that wave, we would have had to been ready in 83. Had we had the same catalog material 5 years earlier, we would have rode that wave probably into great things. But because the record labels by 88 or 89 were looking for the next thing, the next interesting wave of stuff, and we were more the same. And so as a publisher now, I know that's the same thing. I'm looking for a fresh, unique art style, stories with a lot of subtext and heart, and somebody's doing something a little bit differently than what I've seen before. And so that's the stuff I'm looking for. So sometimes people's influences will date themselves too much in their style, and they're not singing with enough of a unique voice to really, nail an audience for the future. And that's kind of what we're looking for these days.
So what do you recommend? Like, if you were to recommend, though, if someone were to come to you and say, what are the, let's say, I don't know, let's see, make it easier. What are the 3 graphic novels I should read? I've never read comics before. What should I read?
I don't know. That's hard for me to say. There's so many ways to skin that cat, and I'll tell
I think
you,
it depends on the person and what they enjoy reading to a huge degree.
Also, back in the Staros Report days, 25 years ago, I was a better person to ask that question to then, because I was reading everything that the industry provided, and really had a really great breadth of knowledge of what everybody was doing fantastically. I'm still a huge fan of Fantagraphics, the drawn and quarterly releases, but I have less and less time to read them as I did as a fan back in the day. I'm so busy editing the 20-something books we're doing a year, and plus now working with 150 people on the side, like helping review their books. I'm turning into the car mechanic that doesn't want to work on his own car, if you know what I mean, right? Like when at the end of the day, the last thing I'm doing is picking up a stack of graphic novels to read for enjoyment. So
I feel the same way. I have a stack of stuff people mail to me or I've purchased that I really want to read, and it's just there's only so many hours in the day.
I think it's not.
Did you miss?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna say, do you miss the time when you could get your arms around the whole industry? Because I think even if you wanted to now, it would had time. The time that you had back then, I don't know that you would be able to consume everything that the industry's putting out.
Not specializing, and you got the whole website of the market too, right? So many different kinds of books over there and such. Yeah, it's tough, man. I still, as professionals in the game, you know the buzz on everything, and you know what people are doing, and you know what they're about, and you've seen the artwork, and you can ooh and ah over it, but you don't have as much time anymore to read every single word that everybody writes anymore.
Yeah.
But I asked for it. I tried to make a career out of this and did, and so this is my job now. I have to,
Well, what are you reading for fun? What's the last comic or graphic novel that you got because, like, oh, I couldn't wait for this to come out, not because it's homework.
The thing is, I don't read a lot for fun. Which is sad because I used to read a prose novel, every 2 days when I was in my 20s. Before I got into college, I read voraciously, and now I don't read that much. My hobby is always been music. I mean, that's my first love in life has always been music. So
Yeah.
I still listen to a lot of hard rock and metal acts. I love ambient music, and of course, I'm a huge Elvis Presley fanatic, and so I spend a lot of time wallowing in that world and going to concerts and stuff. So I tend to spend most of my free time around in the music, world, enjoying that sort of thing. I also love college football and F1 racing, and so I watch those, and so right now we're getting ready for all the bowl games, and the F1 series just wrapped up in really high controversial style a couple of days ago, and that's the kind of stuff I do when I'm not editing 100 books a year.
Uh huh.
Mm.
Well, yeah, I would imagine just the amount of editing alone you do, you're reading a humongous volume of comics and reading it in an intensely scrutinizing way, I would assume.
Do you remember like Dylan Horrock's graphic novel Hicksville that he did?
Yeah.
Right, such a amazing graphic novel. And there was that basement that had all of the unpublished books, that all the books that were never going to be published down in this basement with other things. And in sort of a way, like a lot of the books I read are unpublished, items, right? I'm people who are trying to get published or developing, and maybe this one isn't the one that's going to score them a publishing deal, but the book they do after that, they've honed their skills and craft, and that's the book that gets published. So, in a lot of ways, I read a lot of books that nobody else gets to read, like things that aren't going to see the light of day necessarily, or they're small run things that were self published and that sold at cons and stuff, and very limited readership on it. So I read a lot of
Now,
that.
yeah. Now, of mainstream stuff, just throughout history, like I know you didn't start there. Did you ever come to any of it after the fact? And I mean, obviously, you studied a lot of comics. So, did
I
you?
I never read the mainstream books. I've read a handful of Iron Man and Batman titles here,
Yeah.
and, but never really got into them that much. I always loved the artwork. Like as a kid, I remember watching the Iron Man cartoons I particularly liked as a child, and Spider-Man cartoons, and I loved the Batman series with Adam West. So I love the whole Americana of it and the how iconic those characters were, and I always loved seeing the drawings. But the stories, because I was so literary oriented, the stories never really did that much for me. That's why I
Sure.
never really
Yeah.
started reading them. No disrespect to them. I think they're a great tradition and all that. I just that wasn't for me. But in a way though, when I came into comics, that helped me bring a sort of a fresh take to what I liked and what I wanted to see and what I wanted to cultivate. And that helped me and Brett in the early days, and definitely me now in the last 7 years, and the titles that I've brought into Top Shelf, over the last year.
You know Bill Shannis. What do you think? What do you opinions on Skate Man? Neil Adams Skate Man?
I don't know that book that well, honestly. I'm
Oh, you
not.
know Bill Shannis of Pacific Comics. I saw he recommended your comics mentoring course. He's a friend of
Oh,
the show as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course, yes, yes, of course. The man who used to work at Diamond, right? Yes, yes.
Yeah, and the founder of Pacific Comics.
I'm sorry, I pronounce his last name slightly differently. I'm
Oh
nasty.
yeah, yeah.
But yes, no, I mean, he has been one of my best friends in the industry for years. He's truly a great guy. I mean, his history and the things he's accomplished over the years of comics are mind blowing. Now, much like
Yeah.
me, he's the guy behind the guy. So we're not the famous people. We live very quiet lives, and I'm happily doing so. I don't need a spotlight turned on me. I really don't do a lot of interviews like this or conversations, but I enjoy them when I do. But I like the spotlight being on our creators where it should be. They're the
Yeah.
ones who are out there doing the stuff. But Shanus's work at Diamond, when Shanus was at Diamond, he was a huge friend of Top Shelf. And there were several times in the history of Top Shelf where we were struggling and in trouble, as we probably were every single year. And Shanus and Diamond went out of their way to help Top Shelf move forward and survive and thrive. So we're still great friends today. When I can catch him, I mean, he's the world traveler of
The
world travel.
Globetrotter.
So
Yeah.
he is never in one place for very long.
Well, we did an in-depth interview with him on the show. We talked about Skate
Yeah.
Man. We talked about the history of Pacific Comics. We talked
Yeah.
about what a great guy. And I didn't talk enough about his time at Diamond. We did talk about it extensively, but he really is the unsung hero of Diamond, of what Diamond Comics was.
Comics predated me by a long shot, so I kind of missed that whole window. I came in after the fact, and so that was a part of history of comics, I didn't dive into that much.
Yeah, well, I mean, can you imagine being the first guy to publish Dave Stevens' Rocketeer? That alone puts him in the pantheon of publishers, on top of Jack Kirby and everyone else, and to do creator rights. So let's talk about that at Top Shelf. Do you guys what are your contracts like? Creator ownership? What's the Top Shelf deal?
Yeah, I mean, creators always keep the copyrights to their work, and it's their work, and we're there to support it and make it better. And so things, publishing contracts for all publishers range the gamut of, print and digital publishing only. Sometimes there's entertainment components to the contracts as well, where we would get involved with entertainment. IDW Publishing has a great entertainment division, IDW Entertainment, and the current team is doing some great things, including just like bringing Surfside Girls to Apple TV recently. And there's several other things that I haven't announced yet that are coming, they're doing a great job with. And of course, like Monster on a Hill, Rob Harrell's great book, just actually is premiering the animated film for Paramount. Is premiering on Paramount Plus today, right? Yesterday? Sorry, it started yesterday on Paramount Plus, which is retitled Rumble, and they changed an awful lot about the book, but they're both great in their own way, right? And so, we sometimes do get involved in entertainment with creators, and we do enjoy that if we can. But
okay, well, speaking of changes in adaptations, before we get out of here, you brought it up. So let's talk about. I think you know what I'm going to ask you about. What do you think of the From Hell adaptation? Just give it to us straight. I know you don't want to say anything negative. It was probably a good experience, but tell us the truth.
I do love it. I mean, Eddie Campbell had always envisioned a color edition of From Hell, and so this was his baby. To Alan, the definitive edition is the black and white edition, and that's that. And but the color edition was a project Eddie had it, and he put a lot of work into this. If you go through it, I mean, it's
amazing,
colored in a masterful way. So it's its own thing. I think the two books it's the same story, obviously. Alan Moore's Great Tale, but visually they're quite different experiences now. Eddie did go in and change some of the line work and places and so forth.
I can prove it to you. We looked at this page by page with Eddie, and he went over some of the amazingly anal retentive details that he changed about certain. I could not believe it, like how much he changed. But actually, kind of what I was referring to, a little more jokingly, was the From Hell film adaptation.
Yeah. What about it?
How did you feel going into it and coming out of it, let's say?
Well, the thing is, the From Hell adaptation, the film, I didn't have anything to do with. That was done, was put into place with Alan, Eddie, and Kitchen Sink Press and Dennis Kitchen back in the day. So they were the ones.
Okay, I see.
But the truth is, but to answer the question in general about this and others, anytime you enter a movie deal for any of your products, as a creator or as a publisher, whatever, and even more so as a creator because it's their baby, right? You sort of have to let go in a way, right? Because the studio is going to control that production. Unless you're so famous that they can't help themselves, they're not going to give you approval rights on their movie because they can't have somebody hold up a $30 million, $50 million project, So they're going to control it. And, movies are much more of a committee level kinds of thing. So they're going to change things or have different ideas and go maybe in a different direction sometimes. So not always. I mean, how many times you've been to a movie where you said, "Oh, hey, the movie was good, but the book is even better," right? And it's almost always the case, There's only a couple of movies I've seen in my life where I thought the movie was better than the book. One was Rosemary's Baby. I thought the book was good, but I thought the movie was even better, which is rare. And
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs, probably. I haven't read that book, so I'll go.
I've read it a million times, and it's a toss-up. They are just like about as wonderful as they can. But most of that was because of staying true to the original, and that's where to just take such a great story and just be like, I want the window dressing from it. I want that costume sort of period thing, but I don't care about this uniquely amazing vision of like humanity that is expressed in this comic book, and to turn it into what it was. It's a shame. Only the biggest reason it's a shame to me is because so many more people I'll guarantee to this day have probably seen the movie, then read the entire graphic novel. And many of those people, having seen the movie, might say, I would never read that book because the movie
Yeah.
was so.
Well, I mean, Neil Gaiman, I remember hearing him say once, like, hey, if the movie's not very good, I can say, well, of course, it doesn't have anything to do with the book. The book's the book, the movie. And if the movie's great, he can say, of course, it's based on my book, right?
Yes, thank you.
It's yourself or take credit for it as much as you want. But I think in general, as long as creators don't get so precious that they're just going to be upset by the whole process, just enjoy the fact that one of the things they've done has gone Hollywood, gone mainstream, take it for what it is, take the publicity, the extra book sales, the notoriety. And then if, just like with books, not every book becomes a hit, not every movie becomes a hit. Sometimes movies come out and they're gone in 3 days. Sometimes movies become cultural milestones for decades. You never know. So maybe your movie comes out and it falls a little flat. Maybe it goes great. Just gamble and let it happen and see what happens,
That's great advice. Robert Venditti, who you brought up, said the same thing too. Like when his first graphic novel got adapted into a Bruce Willis movie, right? And it went straight to his head. What a Hollywood big shot that guy is. Let me tell you. Just kidding. He's the nicest guy ever.
It's just untouched, unscathed human beings in the game. He is a sweetheart. And we're still very good friends after all these years. Funny thing, he was one of Top Shelf's very first employees back in the day, right? He's a typical guy, started out in the warehouse and went on to become king of the writers, right? But he had this idea for a graphic novel, this sci-fi thing, and he started showing me some ideas. I thought, well, great, I will help open doors for you. Sci-fi stuff isn't stuff we normally do, but I would, help you open doors and get it where it needs to be, right? But the more I started reading the whole concept and the more I started reading the first draft scripts, I go, this is really good. I said, guess what, Rob? Top Shelf's willing to branch out if you're willing to branch out with us.
Wow, that's cool.
And so we decided to take on the sci-fi book. And it was nice for him because he was on the inside and he was able to watch the whole process as a creator and as an editor and as a publisher, the whole 9 yards of the development of that. And we worked on that together. And I had a hunch on that book. I said, Rob, this story is so right for a movie. I just get a sense that we might get some action on that, And then that moved pretty quickly, like when they got interested in it.
I got a hot take in the comments for you, Chris. What do you think about this?
I actually think the Watchmen movie was a lot better than people gave it credit for because it was maligned a lot. And if you watch it, it's actually faithful to the book and really well designed and really beautiful. Is it better than the book? No. Watchmen is a standalone classic that few things can touch, I mean, my favorite of all of those is V for Vendetta. That's the one that transformed me. That's the one that changed me. But I'm a big fan of Watchmen as well.
I thought the V for Vendetta, on the other hand, was a decent adaptation of a movie. Yeah. Of all the Alan Moore movies, I know he didn't like it personally, but it's the one that I took my mother to, who watched it, and she liked it. She got it, and that's something I never expected.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed V for Vendetta too. Again, I like the book a lot better, but
of course.
Nice. And I think that those movies, even though Alan wasn't really a big in favor of them or a fan of them, they do bring more awareness to the books and brought those books to a wider audience. And I think a lot of people were able to experience them.
Okay. Before we get out of here, Chris, you want to talk a little bit about your time as Vincent D'Onofrio's body double in the Daredevil series? I'm just kidding, but I can't be the first guy who said that to you.
I don't know who's Vincent D'Onofrio.
I'm sorry. I am the first guy to say it to you. So he's the Kingpin in the Daredevil TV series, and he's also Private Pyle in Full Metal Jacket.
Okay, yeah.
If you remember Full Metal Jacket.
Yes, I do. Okay, yeah, he was the young guy who was almost like taking on so much stress that I think he shot himself. Is that the guy?
He kills some people. Yeah, he kills the gunnery sergeant, and they beat him with the soap bars. Yeah, and he is an amazing actor, though. He has such a range, and he plays the Kingpin in the Daredevil Netflix TV series. I have a picture somewhere here for it, but I'm sorry, you got the look. You can pull it
Okay,
off.
yeah. I get it. I'm okay with
Skits comic laughed out loud, so I'll take that. Chris, I know you're a busy guy and you got to get out of here. We're at 1 hour exactly right now. You got anything you want to plug or talk about before we take off?
Dude, I really appreciate you scrolling through the website and we were able to talk about some of the newer books. So that was really nice. And, you know, this was a fun conversation. Happy to do it again down the road sometime. And, if
Yeah, thank
anybody
you.
wants to follow with me, either with, a form of submissions to Top Shelf Comics, our submissions guidelines are at www.topshelfcomics.com/submissions. Or if somebody's wondering about like their project, like is it any good? What could I do to make it better before I send it out to publishers for submission? Then maybe visit chrisstaros.com and we could set something up and talk about quality of your books and what you could do to make them better.
Oh, great!
The game,
And please, yeah, and if you've got comics you want people to see here on this show, send them into the $1 Million Mailbox, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California 95518. And we will spread them out on the $1 Million Comics Cam like we did briefly with From Hell. And you get to see them with my hands on them and everything. Chris, I want to thank you. I got to play the credits and pay some bills.
Right.
If you got time, stick around. Maybe we can chat afterwards. If not, I understand. We'll talk to you soon. Oh, and if you have any projects you want to promote here or any top shelf creators who would like to get more exposure, please send them my way. I would really appreciate it.
Will do, man. Thank you for having me.
Chris.
Really nice. Thank you.
All right, see you soon. Oh, man. Thank you for checking out the show today. Chris Staros was really cool. He had a lot of great stories. He's seen a lot of things. This is a guy I like because he came in before all the hype in literary graphic novels, right? This is somebody who saw stuff that he seized upon and he knew that the medium was capable of a lot more than it was putting out at the time. And I'm going to say all of his bets paid off, right, in spades. Like everything about his vision of where the future was, it happened. Like we are out of time now of mainstream acceptance of comics. We've got kids buying in. We've got teachers buying in. We've got librarians buying in. Everybody's all in. And this is one of the reasons why I say the comics industry is stronger than ever. And you're going to have to change my mind, right? Even this dummy can tell you that the comics industry is strong. Look at those short boxes. Man, I'm sure he doesn't like very good comics, though. Anyway, I know you like good comics, so thank you for sticking around and watching this thing. We had lots of fun talking with Chris Staros. Next time, in a couple of weeks, you could see Jim Rugg, and he'll talk about Hulk Grand Design. If you're into it, tomorrow, tune in at noon Pacific time for Serious Star Trek. We're going to take a look at Space Seed, the original Khan episode from Star Trek, the original series. But no matter when you come back, make sure that it's next time